Welcome to the Impact Room, a business, CX and leadership podcast brought to you by the team at Douglas Jackson. We feature real conversations and powerful insight from impactful and diverse leaders driving growth, business, CX and transformation that helps elevate and shape exceptional leadership. So let's dive into our next episode, and please don't forget to like, subscribe or share if you like this content. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to our latest episode of the Impact Room with myself, Perry Fletcher, practice lead at Douglas Jackson, helping you hire diverse, impactful leaders across the operational support place, including resource planning, data analytics and insight. Today I'm joined with Adam Elliott. Adam is currently the head of customer experience at National Grid. Adam has vast amount of experience across customer experience, voice of the customer, and has worked for many places, including Aviva, the Post Office, the NHS Track and Trace, and Thames Water, just to name a few. Adam, welcome to the Impact Room, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Perry. Great to be with you.
Right. So, Adam, obviously I've given you a nice little introduction, but obviously for anyone that doesn't know yourself, and I know many do, because I know you've spoken at many conferences and network events and stuff in the past, and have worked at some exciting places, but could you just give us a quick kind of intro to yourself and who you are and what you're about, really?
Yeah, no problem. So, so as you said, I have a wealth of experience in both customer insight, customer experience, and customer-oriented transformation, mostly in large corporates across financial services and utilities. So I've had, 10 years in Barclays, 10 years at Eon. I was global head of customer experience at AIG for a few years, and then have been for the last few years have been doing independent consulting and interim work, as you said, at the likes of National Grid, Thames Water, Post Office, Aviva, Test and Trace. Yeah, so a very wide variation of complex and occasionally troubled organizations.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, and such a wide range of industries as well, which obviously we'll get into that and the differences and similarities between the industries, really. But Adam, as is tradition with the Impact Room, we always like to find something out about people that we might not know, or make this human. People are, yes, you're a customer experience specialist, but you are also Adam Elliott. So tell us something about yourself that people might not know about yourself.
I don't know. I tend to gravitate a lot towards kind of endurance sports and things like that. So in my youth, I did a lot of mountaineering, and I climbed a lot of things in the Alps, so like the Matterhorn and Mont Blanc, and also a variety of things in kind of Nepal and South America and Africa. Yeah, so lots of that kind of stuff in my past, but currently a very keen cyclist, so I do a lot of long distance cycling and so on. So yeah,
happy days.
That's me.
And you got any aspirations to go anywhere with the cycling? Obviously, you've travelled the world running, so yeah. What about cycling?
Well, yeah, there is an off-road cycling route that goes from the north coast of Norway to the south of Portugal. It takes about 3 months or so. So that's kind of on the bucket list, but sadly, work gets in the way. So, but maybe one day.
One for a later date. No, brilliant. Happy days. No, great. Thanks for sharing that. So, Adam, I know. Obviously, my colleague Michelle was obviously privileged to be at this event that Bain was hosting for the Loyalty Forum a couple of weeks ago. But she came back to the office and shared so much information from your talk that I had to ring yourself, and then obviously we had a good half an hour conversation on it. So and I said, look, come and share it with the wider community, and that's how we got to here today. So I know you shared a lot on NPS scores and shared on surveys and the lack of survey response. I mean, I won't share the figure because I was shocked, so I'll let you take that that headline, really. But yeah, could you just share a little bit about your findings around surveys and NPS scores that you shared at the Bain event?
Yeah, sure, Perry. So, I mean, given my background, it's no surprise that I've been kind of mucking about with NPS and customer surveys for many, many years. I did my first kind of NPS survey in earnest probably in about, I don't know, 2008. And since then, I have been responsible for launching literally millions of surveys in various organizations, as I'm sure many of your listeners have as well. And so I am a very, have been a very keen proponent of that kind of approach and how important it is to get customer feedback into the heart of the organization. But over the last kind of 15 years or however long as I've been doing it, it has become clear that the response rates from these surveys has declined massively. And I see in some of the organizations I'm at that they are taking as gospel results from surveys where the response rate might be kind of 2% or something. And that the truth is that kind of response rate is not going to be representative of your base. Whatever the volume of surveys that you get, if only 2% of people are responding, it's not going to be particularly representative of your customer base. And you have to ask yourself about, so what's going on with the 98% of people that aren't responding? And so I kind of have a personal perspective that kind of large scale surveying approach is dead or will be dead within the next 5 years. And so all of these kind of sophisticated voice of customer schemes that we have set up are going to get a bit tricky, frankly. And we have to find another way. There has to be a different approach to doing this stuff. And I think a lot of practitioners are aware of this, but there's a lot of putting heads in the sand because, not sure what else to do, or that's kind of what we do, or, various software salespeople are trying to sell solutions. But there has to be another way. Now, to some extent, that can be perfectly well done by looking at sentiment analysis of things like contacts and contact centers, or looking at sentiment analysis over social media, and all of those things are very valid and a sensible way to go, particularly in the contact centers for looking at kind of what you might call transactional NPS kind of stuff. So how good was that call, and using that as a performance metric. And frankly, the big advantage of the sentiment analysis approach is that it will exist for everyone that an agent has spoken to, rather than just the customers that happen to respond to a subsequent survey. So I think that's a brilliant way to go, but that addresses only a kind of small part of NPS. It doesn't address kind of journey NPS, nor kind of brand level organizational metrics, which are often used for performance metrics for executives and so on. So the question is, so what do you do with them and for those objectives? And I think the route that I am proposing, and indeed have actually done on 4 or 5 different occasions now, is to use predictive modeling to predict customer satisfaction. Because in many instances you ought to know that a customer has had a rubbish time. You don't need to survey them. If you take an airline, if someone has had their plane delayed by 3 hours, you don't have to survey them to find out they're annoyed. So just take a step back and think about what you can actually do with the data that you've got. And I have, as I said, in 4 or 5 different organizations, gone through the kind of the hard yards of matching survey data with operational data over as much time as you can do, and then using the operational data to predict NPS or customer satisfaction or whatever it is. And by doing that, you are able to provide the organization with the metrics that it craves that it needs to understand their kind of RAG status on customer satisfaction or whatever it is. But really importantly, you can tell them what operational metrics it is that they need to improve, rather than just saying, well, customers aren't very happy with billing, or they think people are rude, or whatever it is that your surveys are telling you. Because you've linked it to lead indicators, lead operational metrics, you can say to them, well, actually, you need to improve this operational metric, which exists for every single one of your customers.
Yeah.
And so that the quality of the information that you're getting in a volume sense is far, far better than it is for just surveys. And it's really clear to operational folks what it is they've got to do. They have got to improve this thing. It also, I would say, can show up some surprising results. So I did this at a water company, and we happen to have information going back a number of years that gave NPS scores at a kind of geographical area level. And so we said, okay, well, can we look at the operational metrics in those geographic areas and use that to predict NPS? And lo and behold, the answer was, yes, you can. And then if we looked at, so what are the operational metrics that are driving that? And some pretty obvious things came out, like supply interruptions. So, if your water gets cut off, you're generally annoyed. So that wasn't a surprise. But some other things came out as well, like road closures. And so and actually, the amount of time that roads were closed in that area turned out to be quite a predictive metric and quite an important metric. And, when you think about it, it's, well, actually, that's not a surprise, because people are trying to get to work, trying to go shopping, trying to take the kids to school.
Yeah.
And if there's loads of roadworks that are clogging up their routes and make it take time, and it's got that water company's signs all over it, and maybe, who knows, there's no one actually working on the hole, then it really annoys people, and that affects what they think about the organization at a brand level. And that's interesting. And then if you then think, okay, well, why is it that we're digging up roads? Who's responsible for digging up roads?
Yeah.
So how do we ensure that we minimize that? And in this particular water company, when we dug into it, we found that there were at least 5 different bits of the organization that could dig a hole in a road, and they were in no way linked up. They didn't talk to each other. There was no, if you said, what's the plan for this area in terms of digging up roads, there wasn't one. And then you looked at what's the relationship with the local authorities, to which the answer was very litigious, because the local authorities are really annoyed with all these holes being dug in an unplanned way.
Yeah.
And you start to say, and you start to actually think that the findings from this start to be quite profound in terms of actually how you organize your business, how you manage disruption in the areas that you serve, and what you need to do. And then there was another thing that came out of this as well, which was that if you plotted NPS on a map, there were stripes across the map. And I spent a lot of time looking at this, wondering, what's these stripes? So stripes of good or bad performance. And then if you overlaid topography on that, we found that actually there was a lot of unhappiness at the tops of hills. And, so that was unexpected. But another of the drivers of NPS was low pressure. So calls into the call center because of low pressure. And unsurprisingly, at the tops of hills, there can be low pressure.
Yeah.
And what happens actually is that at the bottom of a hill, you have a big pump, to get the water up the hill.
Yeah.
But if you have around that pump, there's obviously higher pressure. But if you have high pressure, you get leaks, and water companies don't like leaks, understandably and rightly. So they would turn down the pressure in those pumps, which would reduce the pressure at the top of the hill. But the people who are lowering the pressure are measured based on their performance metric was leaks. It wasn't customer satisfaction nor volume of calls into the contact center.
Yeah.
So again, you had this kind of, the driver analysis started to have some quite profound implications across the whole organization. And you actually got to a point of saying, well, actually, rather than being organized around Mr. Reservoirs and Mr. Waterworks and Mr. Sewage Works, you start need to have organization perhaps around areas so that you have an individual who's accountable not just for leaks but also customer satisfaction in that area, and so on. And that way you can start to think about, okay, how do we manage digging up roads? How do we manage the pressure in the pipes? How do we manage leaks as one kind of setup? So as I said, by linking, I always think that the best insights comes from the linking of operational data with research data, and by doing this, you can then identify those drivers, and then, as I said, not rely on the surveys in the future, because you can predict the scores that you're going to be getting in those different areas based upon the experience that you're delivering. So that's kind of one example, and I have many others as well that I've done. So I mean, working at an energy retailer, similar kind of thing. They were looking at they had an executive NPS metric that they had to hit, and the exec team were looking at this metric. They weren't terribly good at insight at the time, and they were looking at this metric and say, we have no control over this. This is a kind of a gift from God. How on earth can we manage this brand level NPS metric when we don't believe that we have any control over it? It's down to stuff that's happening in the industry and what's in the papers and all of this kind of stuff. But actually, again, by marrying the operational data with the survey data, we discovered a whole variety of things that they were directly in control of and which was affecting what customers thought of them. So things like changing people's direct debits. Okay, well, no surprise. Now, you did that. Customers don't necessarily call in about that. That doesn't mean they're not annoyed or happy if it's reduced. And similarly, price changes going through would have an effect. And actually, we were able, by doing that analysis, to create a scenario planning tool which said, these are all the customers whose direct debits you're going to be changing over the next 6 months. And this is the price changes that are likely to be coming through. Given that, this is what's going to happen to your NPS score. And it worked. And it's, they started realizing, oh, blimey, we are in control of this. And also, it highlighted a lot of other things like, there was an issue with first contact resolution. So you could see so customers who contacted tended to be less happy than people who hadn't contacted, but it also highlighted a big first contact resolution issue which they needed to address. So they went from this position of we'd have no idea what this metric is or what it's telling us to actually being able to scenario plan it using their operational data, and to kind of recognize that there were a variety of things that were completely under their control. So I think, so my conclusion from all of this is that there is, you clearly have to do surveys in order to do this predictive stuff, but frankly, you can afford to spend a lot more money on getting a good response rate and taking care over those surveys to get a good sample and a representative sample, make sure it is representative, do it at high, quite a high volume, so that you can then match it with operational data and do your modeling, but then you don't need to keep that survey going. So it's more of a kind of a one-off hit,
Yeah.
and then you can build your predictive models, create your dashboards off that, and then maybe once a year you repeat your survey, see if you've still got the right drivers and so on, but use that approach to manage your organization and its metrics, rather than relying on these surveys, which, as I said, they're just going to disappear. It's going to go down to zero over the next 5 years, and my message: we need to find another way.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And no, brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. And to say some great examples already of how you've been able to deliver it and stuff. So if I'm an organization that's still doing surveys and still getting that 2% response rate, don't really understand how I can get to this predictive level. I mean, what are your kind of top tips, stroke impactful kind of decisions that where should I start, if that makes sense?
Well, I guess, first up, it depends whether you've got analytical resources in your organization or not.
Yeah.
So if you've got a data science team, then I would go and have a chat to them, and say, this is what I want to do. How do we get to this point? But actually, there is a make or buy decision here, because there are some agencies out there that will do this work with you. A lot of them, some of them are quite small, but they're kind of growing fast, and there's some quite interesting, as I say, interesting organizations out there that do this, or are starting to think about it. And so you can either do it in-house with your own data science team, or you can do it with an agency. You do need the base data. You need to have that survey data matched with operational data, or have the ability, the data protection, permission and so on, to be able to match stuff. So there's a lot of kind of governance and technical stuff there. But then you have this make or buy choice over agency or internal, and that's quite nuanced, as ever. So the advantage of going external is that the organizations you might talk to are likely to have thought a lot about how to do this. They're likely to have some very skilled data scientists who do this for a living. And they're also likely to have some quite slick dashboards through which to present the information back. The disadvantage of external is that they don't understand your data. And they're also outside your organization, and therefore getting the data from inside to outside, and we're talking about PII data typically, at a low level of granularity, and your cybersecurity guys may be unkeen for that data to be leaving the organization. So it can be. So I think you might get a better and faster solution with an agency, but there's a lot of data protection hurdles to get through to get there. Also, you're going to rely on your data science, your internal data team, to explain the data to the agency, and they're probably going to have to do quite a lot of data manipulation in order to get it to a fit state to send it externally. And so your data science team might not be very enthusiastic about this, because they've got to do all of the grunt work in terms of data prep, and then they've got to explain to someone else what all the data means. And that collectively can be a lot of the work involved in doing modeling in the first place. And then the external agency gets to do the fun bit, which is to produce the model. So it's a nuanced decision, and something that you have to work through yourself. I have tried both. I've done this 4 times, 3 times, and I'm in my 4th or 5th time now, and I've used internal teams 3 times and an external agency once, and the external agency approach didn't work very well for all of the reasons that I've just described, in terms of the IT data security guys weren't very keen. and neither were the data science team either. So I think it through, but I, as I said, the good thing about the agency is that they have the dashboards and means of communicating the information back into your organization much more slickly. So it's a balance. You have to find your own way through that, I think.
It's really interesting actually, and I think with the AI piece. I mean, obviously we had Ahmed join us on the Impact Room recently, and I think obviously that was one thing that he said was, there is a lot of noise around AI at the moment, and actually AI is great at freeing up the time. It can cut out the admin, it can tidy up the data, it can speed up the report generation. So with the data science, if from an internal perspective, actually we can get to the good solid dashboards. But actually, I think as you alluded to there a little bit, it's actually what can we do now with this extra time? And even if you use agencies to produce the dashboards, what are the questions as a customer experience or a customer insight leader should we be asking of the data? And I think that's where the big gap lies in a lot of businesses potentially. It's not necessarily don't have the data, it's asking the right questions of that data. Like you said, it's that predictive and aligning the two up. It's having so many businesses have got access to the data now, and AI is enabling that. But actually, have we got the right strategic leaders in place asking the right questions?
Well, yeah. I mean, it has always seemed to me that it is the role of the people in insight to tell them the questions that they ought to be asking.
Agree.
Tell them
agree.
the answers to the questions that they ought to be asking.
Yeah.
And that's always been my approach. And I think that this predictive approach, and I hope that's come through in some of the examples I've given you, highlights to the organization things that it didn't know, which were important. And and that once you start getting that understanding and those new insights and the understanding of the drivers, it starts to ask a whole load of other questions. So as one thing becomes clear, new questions come into focus, which this data can start to inform, like, actually at that water company, should we completely reorganize the way we run the business, and make it much more around the outputs that matter towards customers rather than how we manage our assets? So I think it's a kind of chicken and egg thing, and I guess
agree.
And I think what I'm saying is that not only does this approach provide an alternative to doing loads of surveys which just piss customers off, not only does it do that, it also opens the box on a whole load of new questions that the organization should be answering, questions that it didn't know it had to answer.
100% agree. I mean, look, obviously, I mean, a little bit like what you were saying, actually, the data science teams could build this pretty quickly, but actually, it's the people who need to understand the process, the planning, the customer outcomes that can deliver this. If not, the tech's going to take you so far, but actually, the data, you can have the fanciest reports in the world, but actually, if you've not got anyone that can understand that process, planning, and outcome, and that actually all three stories that you shared, that was one thing that drove home to me, was like you said, even with that energy provider, they had a great insight team, but they weren't doing the right things with it. And actually, obviously, look, the thing that came back from me, the common denominator is yourself a little bit in this. You know what I mean? It's taking it, and and I don't mean to like is that as put Adam on a pedestal as such, but it is that, well, actually, look, the data was there, we understood the data, but we wasn't doing the right things with it. We wasn't looking at the right processes. We wasn't looking at the right customer outcomes, and we wasn't bringing it together to be able to make the right decisions. We had surveys over here telling us one thing, operational data over here telling us another. And actually, with the one thing we're seeing in recruitment is this, and I know we've had this conversation, is this forming of the chief customer officer role, etc., to bring all of this together now. Because like you said it a minute ago, like the customer journey just isn't the contact center or the the fact that, as you said, it's the people that the breakdown. It could be an engineer coming to visit your house. It could be you go into a doctor's surgery. It's the receptionist. It's the doctor themselves. It could be over there in the NHS. Or I've got hospitals. We're looking at industry we haven't discussed. Yeah, the customer journey is from anything that you do, and actually it could be the frequently asked question page on a website, all of this stuff that we can now see with data and clicks on the websites and all of that stuff. Actually, it's bringing the customer journey process into a way that kind of goes, well, hang on, are we turning our customers off because we can't give them the answer they want quick enough? And by the time they're calling the contact center, the reason they're angry is because they've spent 4 hours talking to a chatbot. And it comes back to that whole omni-channel thing from back in the day and all that stuff. But actually, it's the overall customer. And like you said, brand as well. If we've got a TV advert that's got something a bit controversial about it, is that putting someone off the wrong way or whatever it is? So yeah, really interesting points.
No, I mean, in the end, organizations tend to be somewhat functionally structured, and therefore they tend to think about problems in functional ways rather than in customer outcome ways. And I think what this approach that I'm proposing does is enables the organization to see what of the functional things that they do, so what functional metrics, that things that they understand, the impact that those have on customers and how they feel, most of which is obvious once you know it, but it's it's not obvious till it's on a slide, frankly. So but once good insights should never be a surprise. Once you see it, then you just think, oh yeah, okay. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff that comes out of this, where you're highlighting things that people kind of know, but it's forcing the question up to the surface and requiring them to respond and think about what they need to do. Or at least, if the organization has a genuine ambition to become more customer focused, then it should make them think in that way. So there's a little bit of a test for an executive team in that way.
And I mean, look, you might not have the answers to this, you might not even have the data to hand, but with the survey responses, I mean, have you tested doing the annual ones, and did you get a better response rate than doing just a survey every time you've, I mean, as you say, like the thing is, every time you contact like you said, every time you contact a company now in any way, shape or form, you get the automated text message going right. And let's be honest, why would you respond? You'd spend half your day responding to them. That's the thing is, it's so easy now to survey. But I just wondered whether like a bigger survey or an annual survey, you have seen an increase on the response rate or not.
No, I mean, I think so. So do I have data that shows how response rates have declined over time? No, I don't. I did suggest to Bain that they might want to pull that together, but I don't have it. But I have been a practitioner for
it's obvious,
and I know what the response rates were when I started, and I know what they are now, and it's markedly different. Plus, as you said, our own personal experience. I mean, I am a serious practitioner of all this stuff. I never respond to surveys. I just can't be asked. Why would I? I only ever answer them when I'm interested to see what the survey structure is going to be. So it's there's just too much, and therefore the quality of that and the nature of the skew of the respondents is just going to be quite profound in many instances. So we got to find, as I said, we've got to find a different way. Sorry, I can't remember quite what the question was. If there was one.
No, fine. No answer. I was just kind of seeing, whether there was any data available on response rates. But as you say, I mean, we've been in a decline for so long, and actually, I just wondered whether, obviously surveying someone randomly, say in September, whether there was a better response rate than just every time you put the phone down on someone, or every time an engineer's visited, or there's been or anything like that. Yeah, as you say, but it with surveys though, it's it's a little bit like I did some research on the Uber methodology, and like Uber train their and obviously not any contact center you read or any interaction you have, you always get the agent will say at the end, or the engineer's been in your house or whatever it will, you go, oh, you'll get a text message if you wouldn't mind, will you just,
Yeah.
it reflects on me, and say, so even if you respond, you're probably only doing it because you like the agent for a minute, you know what I mean? You're not doing it for your own, actually, and that's it. But actually, what I was going to say is looking at the Uber methodology, like Uber train their, as I've done some research into, so Uber train their drivers to ask you 3 questions um, at the end of every journey, and it's just
Hmm.
it's like, oh, what's the rest of your day got planned? I can't remember the 3 questions, but it's like, oh yeah, what's the rest, and an Uber driver won't talk to you for the whole journey. It's just that last 3 minutes, because you only remember the last 2 minutes of the
Yeah.
journey. You don't remember that the Uber driver told you he was going to be there on the app at 20 past 4, and he
Yeah.
turned up at 25 past 4. He was 5 minutes late, because by the time you've done the journey, it's a little bit like, like you said, with an aeroplane being delayed. Even if
Mm.
that aeroplane's delayed by 2 hours, if your flight's on time, if your flight then is pretty smooth, you had a good experience, you get your bag quick the other end, you forget about it. Your flight could have arrived 20 minutes early, but then if you have to wait that 20 minutes waiting for your bag, so you're getting out of the airport no earlier or no slower than you would have
Yep.
anyway. You remember that last bit
Yeah.
of the
Yeah. Yeah.
journey, and
No,
it's really interesting.
it's the peak end rule. So it's the peak
Mm,
experience that you have
yeah,
during, and then the end point, which is why breakfasts are rather important for hotels, because it's the last thing that you do. So yeah. No, exactly.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
brill, happy days. No, brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. And I mean, is there anything else that you wanted to share today that we don't think we've covered? Or hopefully, as I say, it gives some people something to think about. And obviously, I'll share your contact details
Mm.
on the video
Yeah.
and on the podcast. But obviously, they can reach yourself. Obviously it's Adam Elliott, double L, double T, on LinkedIn and stuff. Anyway, if anyone wants to
Yeah.
reach out directly. So yeah. But is there anything
Yeah.
else that you wanted to
No,
share today, Adam?
I think Perry, we've kind of covered it.
Yeah.
I think it's probably enough anyway.
Yeah, well,
So,
that's it. Yeah, I mean, we as we say, we already had an hour conversation on this recently, and I'm sure we
yeah.
could keep talking all day about it. But hopefully that's enough just to do that thought provokingness, to kind of make people think about this, and actually how it's that kind of data, people, tech all comes together in this. There's not one solution. It's not like
Mm.
you can just, like you said, even if you use an agency, that will take you so far, but actually it won't give you the whole answer. You do need
Well,
to have the right data, the right technology or agency, and then
and
the right people in place to deliver it.
exactly. And assembling the data is actually the hard bit. Plus wrestling with your cybersecurity and GDPR people and all of that. So
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think the thing is, so many people have invested in data science
Mm.
over the years. Data science a couple of years back was one of the fastest growing job titles in the industry. And I think so many people invest in data science, but it was a hot topic a few years back. Oh, we need this data
Mm.
science. It's all this. Oh, and I think. But actually, it's that kind of thing. So, how do we get the most out of them now? And it's, and now obviously, as I say, AI is only going to speed up with that processing of the
Mm.
data. How can we make the right business decisions with, and have the right people in place now to make the right business decisions, looking at, we mentioned before, the process, the plan, etc., etc. And now we've got, it's not necessarily more time on our hands, but now we've got that ability to do that with the right data coming through. So
Yeah.
no, thanks for sharing that, Adam. That was brilliant.
Okay.
So yeah, thanks for joining us on the Impact Room. I really appreciate it. And I say I'll share your contact details if anyone wants to reach out. But Adam, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Barry. Take care.